Welcome. You're watching Rugby with Rifle, a podcast about all things rugby and life, with your host, Danny Pabone and Rifle Scudder.
Welcome to another episode of Rugby with Rifle, a podcast about all things rugby and life. As always, I am joined here by my friend Rifle. Rifle, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Danny. I'm excited, obviously, at this recording. We got some more Six Nations coming up this weekend. We had some URC the last 2 weekends where South African teams played against each other, which is always very nice for me. So to watch that. So yeah, very excited about the weekend coming up. So, and then obviously in the Six Nations, Warren Gatland not there, new coach. So, what's going to happen
Yeah,
there with their new coach in Wales. So, yeah, very interesting times we're living in. But I'm well, thank you.
good to hear. And I know we both were thought we were going to be dealing with weather yesterday, and it wasn't as bad as forecast. So I'm glad. I'm very happy for that. Um, yeah. So the
Glad the
less
weatherman
snow,
got
the
it wrong again.
yeah, the less snow I have to shovel, the better.
Yes.
So you just mentioned that. I know in the last episode we spoke about Warren Gatland, the Welsh head coach, stepping down after the second game uh, of the Six Nations series. And I know you had mentioned, and for me reading all that he has done for Wales rugby and the success he's had in the past. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years, he hasn't had any success at all, having 14 losses in a row. Um, and I know you had sent me an article about different players coming out and some understanding that he was a great coach. Unfortunately, he hasn't produced past couple of years, so there's consequences for that. And then there's other players that, to me, again, not knowing, specifically the player or not knowing, who they are because I'm still learning the players from the different teams and stuff. Some players were straight out saying, he had to go and weren't a fan of Warren Gatland. So yeah, so it's interesting to see, just dig deep into what caused his departure and what many people think was his style of putting teams together. Yeah,
Yeah, last week when we spoke about it, I said I don't think he had much of a different thing that he could do. But after his daughter wrote a letter and, that went viral, and just now reading the reaction to his daughter's letter. I
yeah,
obviously don't follow the rugby in Wales as I do the South Africans. I don't know the clubs in Wales as I do know the clubs and the players in South Africa. So just my limited point of view looking from the sideline, I felt and still do feel very sorry for Warren Gatland. Listened to an interview yesterday, his first interview that he's done since
mm,
he stepped away. It was a whole hour interview yesterday. Very, very good interview. But I said I don't think that he could do anything else. But reading some of the players and people's comments, they say he definitely could have done something else. He was playing players out of position. He played players that he said he left players out because he said they were too old and they won't be able to be there in the next World Cup. So he's trying to build the Welsh team. Yet other players in the team were older than the players that he left out. So, players, I didn't realize that. So now that it's all coming out and now reading the depth about other players' perceptions of what he could have done differently and so on, I just looked at Gatland as what he's achieved with the British and Irish Lions and with Wales. I came from that point of view. But now getting into the woodwork and reading what players are actually saying, and they're saying he could have done things a little different, and maybe he should have handled things a little differently. So I look at it from what I said last week. Now I look at it a bit different. Maybe he could have done things in a different way or different manner. But I don't change my point of view that he's an amazing coach and he has done so much for Welsh rugby. And I'm still very, very sad to see him go. I'm happy that he's going and spend some time with his family and all of that. But as a coach for Wales, he was fantastic up until the last 14 games that they lost. So I've maybe changed my mind of what I said last week. Maybe listening to the players, he could have maybe done things differently. But still a lot of respect and honor, as does the whole rugby world have for Gats and just what he accomplished and the coach that he still is. And he's already got offers now that people are asking him to come and coach other places. So he'll definitely go somewhere else and help a team definitely get better. So just I'll talk about last week and this week a little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, and having a middle of the road approach to thinking about the legacy of Warren Gatlin. Uh, yes, he's had great success, but also again past couple of years it's been really rough, and it just brings me back to, and again I always comparing rugby to American football because I've been watching American football a lot more than rugby. It just brings me back to the example of Bill Belichick of the Patriots, where
Mm.
he had about 15, 16 years, I mean, of just un maybe the only current coach that could probably catch him is Andy Reid of the Kansas City Chiefs when it comes to championships. Um, but the last 4 or 5 years when Brady left, it wasn't as successful, and the two careers are, in my opinion and in my mind, are so similar because, from my perspective, Warren Gatlin having so much success in his first, however, 10, 12 years before he wasn't having success. I wonder if it gets to your head and, with so much success that you're like, okay, it's my way or the highway. And if you don't like it, you can leave. And that's pretty much what happened to Bill Belichick, where, Brady had the capacity to deal with Belichick because he was such a great player, and Belichick was a tough coach. But then when Brady left and you had new players come in, you know he couldn't adjust to the new players and adjust his coaching style. And for what as we know, Belichick is not with the Patriots anymore. So yeah, the two careers are very similar in that way.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think I read that apparently Gatlin, I think I read, is they want him, the negotiating or something for him to be a commentator in the British and Irish Lions tour this year.
Okay.
So if he doesn't coach, I think I read that somewhere. So if he doesn't coach, he'll be commentating this year.
It would be interesting because they got, I don't know if you saw, they got Eddie Jones, and he's a commentator for the Six Nations. So
Mm,
um, a lot of talk about his style of coaching and how he wants everything done and so on. But he's definitely in there in the commentary box. So it will be good for Gatlin to be able to get there, and just a lot of wisdom and knowledge about the game to be able to commentate. I think you learn a lot from guys that have been in the thick of things and know what's going on. So it would be nice to have him there doing that. I'd look forward to that.
yeah, yeah, should be interesting to hear his thoughts and play-by-play commentating and games and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So let's see if that actually happens, and we see him in the commentator box for the
that would be
British
good.
Irish. Yeah.
Mm.
So on today's episode, everybody, we're gonna do a little pivot, being that we had a bye week in the Six Nations. There's also over the past couple of weeks or so been teams playing in Europe. There are, and these matches that are played are, are matches that are actually determine a few teams in Europe that are qualified now for the Rugby World Cup in 2027 in Australia. So not only do we have Six Nations, we also have other countries competing for spots in the 2027 Rugby World Cup. That's Australia is going to be the host country of the 2027 um, Rugby World Cup. So we decided just to just touch upon a few things about the next Rugby World Cup, and just see that there's things going on outside the Six Nations uh, in international rugby. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So we're gonna get right to it, and as you can see here, everyone, that like I said, Rugby World Cup is going to be hosted by Australia in 2027. And these are the 12 teams that have already qualified because of the performance of in the 2023 Rugby World Cup. So yeah, so it's very interesting to see these teams. Obviously teams that are competing in the Six Nations right now. Actually, all of them that are competing, right? Oh no, am I mistaken? Ireland, France, Italy, England. Yeah, all the Six Nations teams are already qualified.
I remember we had the tier one nations. They automatically
Yes.
kind of go through. So you've got the teams from the north who play in the Six Nations.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you remember the teams in the south that play in the rugby championship, you've got South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, and Argentina in there. Those four
Okay.
also kind of
Okay.
automatically. Those are tier one nations. And they always go through in the World Cups. So they always, not always, but thinking of Ireland now, they don't go
Yeah.
to they never got past the quarterfinals, but they're the tier one, so they make it through the preliminary stages, and then they qualify for the next Rugby World Cup. So in there, other than you can see only the two countries that are not the tier one. There you have Fiji
Mm-hmm.
and you have Japan, and those are the two countries other than the four from the south and the six from the north that are already in the next 27 World Cup. And as you can see at the top, this is obviously the first time that they've expanded it to 24 teams. So they're busy now, as you said, in Europe, trying to get teams like Romania, Georgia, Spain, Portugal, those teams to see playing against one another who's actually going to make it to be in the World Cup. So very interesting to see those countries stepping it up and rugby becoming bigger, and more fans watching their team, traveling with them. So, a country like Portugal won, I think, their first game in the last World Cup. They had lots of guys following them. Georgia, who is actually now, if you look at the world rankings, Georgia is ranked above Wales for the first time.
Oh.
So they're pushing very, very hard to go to the top. And, they're obviously saying we need to play in the Six Nations if we can beat Wales and we in Europe, So very interesting what's happening now.
Yeah, it is. When you have other countries being successful in any sport, that's great for the growth of the sport internationally. We see that currently over the past, I don't know, maybe since 2000 or so, give or take, in the NBA, where we had, in the 80s and 90s and the Olympics, when the Olympics, U.S. Olympic team switched from having only college players to having professional players. I mean, it was just a no contest. Because when we had the Olympic team and basketball teams with college players, obviously you had professional players from other countries could compete with them. But then when we went to all professionals, then it was just another story where you had the U.S. basketball team beating teams by like 40, 50, 60 points.
Yeah,
So I say all that to say is when now you have a lot more countries in basketball that are very good and give the U.S. some competition, such as Germany, France,
mm,
and other countries. The sport of basketball has grown internationally. So,
yeah,
I'm happy and excited to see that rugby is also going in that direction.
yeah,
So it's going to be pretty cool to see. And as we always talk about, the Rugby World Cup is scheduled to be in the United States in 2031. So
31. That's right. Yeah,
looking forward to the growth of the sport in this country as well.
yeah,
So these are the 12, again, teams that have already qualified because of the 2023 Rugby World Cup performance. Now, I know we have spoken about this in previous episodes, Rifle, but now we're gonna go a little bit more deep into it, because I know we had spoken about briefly about how do you qualify for the Rugby World Cup. So these are the qualification regions. And again, I know you had mentioned this before in a previous episode of the different regions that the teams come out of in order to qualify for the Rugby World Cup. And this goes the same for soccer when you have the World Cup, soccer World Cup, uh, or football World Cup, because to everybody else outside of America, soccer is football.
mhm,
So it's a very similar setup in regions. So how do now that the Rugby World Cup has been extended to 24 teams, one might wonder how the other 12 teams selected. So as everybody can see here, we have Europe. Four teams come out of Europe region, one team out of Asia, one team out of Africa, one team out of South America, and three teams out of the Pacific region. And
mm.
we're gonna get to the other two teams because anybody that's good at math is gonna say, "Oh, but that's only 10 teams." We'll get to that. So yes, so it's pretty interesting, Rifle, to actually have just a basic understanding of where the other teams are pulled from to qualify for the Rugby World Cup.
Yeah. And if you look at these teams on here, some countries are, they start with the seven-a-side format, and some, for example, Fiji's are good in both. They're very good with a seven-a-side. They've won it many, many times, and they're getting better. They're good. They're always up there with a 15-man as well. The 15-man rugby that we follow.
Yeah.
But here are other countries like in Europe, specifically countries like Portugal that I've mentioned, and Spain. They're getting better and better. And Georgia is another country there that is, they're doing very, very well. And, those countries have already, some of them have already qualified. They've gone through. But you can see these countries starting many, many years ago, and just like Georgia, they just stuck in there. And it's terrible when you play someone like New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, England, and you lose 40,
Mhm.
50 nil. but they kept on doing it, and just became better and better to now, where they're actually becoming a team that not could win on the day, but they're not being hammered like they used to in olden days. And they're becoming better, and their fans are becoming, more involved in the game and following the team, traveling with them. So that's very nice to see. I mean, Europe, the teams there are definitely growing. One thing, just personally for me, that I find funny in this whole thing here is where it says Pacific, and there you've got Japan in there. Me personally, I see Japan as Asia, as the East,
Yeah.
because you've got Japan and Canada and United States and Fiji. So how they, if you talk about the Pacific Islands, when you talk about New Zealand, when they play, and some of their players that come from Tonga, some of their players that come from Samoa, that to me is Pacific. Just I think of when they speak about the Pacific Cup, that's a Tonga, that's a Fiji, that's a Samoa, those guys playing against each other. So how Japan and USA and Canada land in there, I do not know. It doesn't matter. I mean, I'm just a fan. But that to me is a little strange. However, if you look at Africa, teams like Namibia, just next to my country of South Africa to the north, they play well, and they do good. They qualify most of the time. And then Kenya, also definitely a country to watch that's becoming better and better. And specifically their 7-a-side rugby is just, man, they're going from strength to strength. So hopefully they'll be able to take what they've done in the sevens and be able to change it to the 15-man format. We'll have to wait and see, but these are the regions that they pick and choose from, and these guys have to play amongst themselves and then against other regions to see who goes through. So I think it is good just for us to see what the regions are, how many teams from each region goes through, and who currently are the teams that are playing or vying for a spot in the World Cup. So this is a good picture over here to show us that.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess to your point, you know, teams are added to the international scene. Whatever sport. I mean, it happens also in the U.S. when you have different sports leagues add teams, and because one region already, you know, for example, uh, there's been times in the past in the NFL where you have a southern state be in the northern conference, and you're like, how is that? They're in the south. How are they in the northern conference?
Mm.
So I guess after a while, when teams join, if you have a certain region or conference, whatever, depending on the sport, that's already full, and you need to put this team in order to make it all even. You come up with situations where, like, why is that country or team in that conference? They're supposed to be in this conference.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm guessing that's the case here in the Pacific.
Yeah. And there always talks. I mean, there talks now since last year, it's becoming more serious, that in the world of rugby, there were, talks about, should South Africa join the Six Nations?
Hmm,
Would that be good? Would that be bad? There were a lot of talks
interesting.
about that. Now, South Africa, Southern Hemispheres, Six Nations on North. So is that good? Is that bad? The other thing now, Georgia becoming better and better. Should they now join the Six Nations? And as we had the Five Nations, which became the six. Do you add Georgia to that and say, okay, now it's a sevens? Or should you have maybe from Europe, for example, the best team of the countries that are not in the Six Nations? So let's say now it would be Georgia. If you have Georgia play against the winners of the wooden spoon. So let's
Hmm.
say at the end of the Six Nations, if Georgia would play Wales, and then the winner of those two teams play in the next year's Six Nations. It's just me. It's not talked about. I'm just thinking that they could do that or something like that to enlarge the countries that want to become better, and if they are working hard and they are improving, to maybe just give them that chance. So to say, if you have, and you can take on the winners of the the losing team in the Six Nations, the winners of the wooden spoon, if you can beat them, then you can play. So I think that's also one way different areas and different teams get in and out, because like I say, there were talks that people were saying, should South Africa join the Six Nations? I'm not saying yes, no. I'm just, there talks about that. That's all I'm saying.
And if any of the executives who put the Six Nations together, I have Rifle's number. You could call him, and he could give you a few ideas.
I don't know if that will help at all.
Yeah, yeah, it is interesting. Just to think about stuff like that. The up and coming teams, giving them opportunity to prove how much to prove how much they improved. That's a tongue
Yeah,
twister.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you look this year at the international sides and tours, Springboks are hosting. I think we got Italy twice in South Africa. So Italy are coming to South Africa, and that's going to be huge. I mean, it's international rugby. It's great, but it's one of those games where one would think that South Africa should win both those tests. It's in South Africa, so that our Springboks will be playing at home. But it's another thing of Italy has been, over the years, they've improved and they've stuck with it and they've done better and they've got good coaches and better players, and they're now not the last team in the Six Nations. They're not going to end up wooden spoon anymore, where in previous years that it was just automatically they were going to be there. But now they're beating Wales. But now they're going to go all the way to South Africa and play 2 tests in South Africa. So that's going to be wonderful for rugby, and it's obviously going to improve Italy, and it's going to make them a better team, and they're going to be learning and gaining a lot of experience from that. So that's something to look at, as well as having these teams that are on the brink of becoming really, really good rugby teams play against the best over and over again, and just gain experience and knowledge about the game, and the players become harder and they learn more. So that's a good thing. So hopefully we can continue with that in rugby, but we'll see what the IRB does, and hopefully they don't change things around too much. But those are going to be two games for Italy that are going to be huge for them to learn and gain experience in South Africa this year.
Yes. Yeah. That should be great for rugby, as you say.
Yeah.
And obviously, you want South Africa to beat them badly, but still,
You want me to
still
answer
great
that?
for Italy.
No, just
You're
in
just
all
being
seriousness,
nice.
I think it would be a wonderful time for South Africa to
Yeah.
try new players, up and coming players that have not played for the Springboks before, but they're knocking on that door. They're good. They've been playing well for their clubs. They're doing really, really good. So they've raised their hands and said, if there's an opportunity, put me in. So I think that would be great. I think Rassie is the kind of coach, our Springbok coach, that he will definitely experiment, as we like to say. And he'll put players in there that are maybe they're not the absolute best right now.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows, in 2 years' time, when 2027 comes around for the next World Cup, they're going to be much better than what they are right now. But give them the chance now and the opportunity to see how they perform on the international stage, so that if they do very well, then maybe you can keep them and look at them and keep them in mind for 2027. And that's not just for South Africa. I mean, that's for every team. That's for every country can do that.
Yeah, yeah, and as you had mentioned before, um, South Africa over the past few years or so, or at least since Rossi has taken over the head coaching duties, they are spoiled, I guess is the only word that's come to my mind, in the talent that they have to pull from. There's a lot of great players in South Africa, so it's kind of great to have the opportunity to experiment with different players, knowing that there's so much talent in the country.
Yeah,
Must be a great thing to have.
Warren Gatlin was saying in this interview yesterday, he was talking about because in in Wales, they changed the system. So the clubs, they've changed the way the clubs work. I mean, Wales used to have some of the best clubs in the world, and they've changed that. And so their feeding system, their schoolboy rugby that goes into clubs is not that good. And then from club level, if your clubs are not doing well, those guys that are playing in club level, they get picked for the international side. So he was just saying the reason that Ireland, New Zealand, and South Africa, the reason those three countries have such amazing depth is because of their schoolboy rugby.
Mm.
And you can go to a schoolboy game in New Zealand, in Ireland, or in South Africa, and you can watch school rugby. And there are thousands of people next to the field. It's amazing, just a schoolboy. And that's where it starts, because from the schoolboy level, they get picked when they finish school. Then they go to university, and now they can start playing for clubs. So if your schoolboy level is good, those players get picked for the clubs, and now from the club you go to the international level. But Wales currently at this stage, their school system, the feeder, so how they feed the schools and then from there they go to the clubs is lacking, and it's not good. That's why they're not doing that well. But that was one of Warren Gatlin's whole points. Is you go look at South Africa, you go look at New Zealand and Ireland, their feeder system, I mean, their schoolboy rugby is just phenomenal.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's a great situation to be in.
Yeah, very much
Uh,
so.
yeah, and a combination with having a great coach. I guess that's the other thing that plays into it as well, is that and I'm sure this is true for the current coaches of New Zealand and Ireland as well, is that uh, you know with Rossi, is that you have a coach that's not scared of trying new things. Number one. Number two, they are able to do that because they've had success.
Mm.
So a combination of those two things, it really plays into the coach's hand. If their DNA is, hey, let's develop players so that when we need them, they're prepared to come in. So a combination between having that natural DNA of taking risks, on top of you could take those risks because you've been successful, and I guess the two go together.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I take Rassi, I think he's a kind of guy that he takes risks. They calculated risks,
Mm-hmm.
but he started even doing that before he had success. I mean, he took
Yeah.
over in 2017 when we were just absolutely, my goodness, we were bad. The Springboks, oh good, oh my, I don't even want to think about those days. And
Yeah.
he took over, and the way that he coaches and what he did, just a very, very simple illustration was the 7-1 split. The rugby world absolutely lost their minds when Rassi brought in a 7-1 split. And last week or 2 weeks ago, what did England do? They had a 6-2. And what is France doing on the weekend against Italy? What is France doing? They're looking at a 7-1. So, Rassi tried that. And if you go and you watch Chasing the Sun 2, having to be able to do a 7-1, you must have guys that can play in the back line should something happen. And you've seen the documentary before. They actually called Cheslin Colby into the training room with the coaches, and they say, listen, we want to do the 7-1 split, but we can only do it if we have an extra scrum off. And would you be willing to play scrum off, And Cheslin, who is so good in sevens, he's played scrum off basically in 7-a-side format. So he knows how to play scrum off, but you still have to get him to buy into this and say yes. So it's one thing of trying new things, but you must have calculated risks But what I'm saying is, when he did the 7-1, absolutely blew the rugby world's mind. Now England had a 6-2. No one said anything about it. France was talking about a 7-1. Crickets. Okay, if you can't beat them, join them. That's what the whole world is saying now. So it's just, oh my goodness. It's, yeah. Let's
Yeah.
move on.
Yeah. I was just about to say, we could talk for hours about this stuff. And, you know, me, I've said it before, and I say it again, just learning the game of rugby over the past year and a half, it's been a great experience. And it's getting to the point where, give me another year and I'm going to be able to keep up with Rifle talking about rugby, or maybe two.
Well, even if you can't, what you said last in our last episode, you said this is your first Six Nations that you're watching, and the game between England and France, you were on the edge of your seat
Yeah.
watching that game. And you've learned a lot, and you're doing well, and you know a lot, and you know the players and the names, and you're getting there very quickly, and you're doing very well. But it's your first Six Nations, and you're at the edge of your seat. So how amazing is the game of rugby? That
Yeah,
someone
it
who's a
truly is.
football fanatic or a basketball fanatic, he comes to rugby in the first season of the Six Nation that he watches, you're biting your toenails because you're so stressed about who's going to win, what's going to happen. That's just the amazing game of rugby. That's what it can do for you. If you just know one or two rules and understand a couple of the basics, you can really, really get into it and enjoy the game without talking about knowledge about a 7-1 split and extra scrum off on the field. Just watching the game, it can be very, very exciting. That's one of the wonderful things about our game of rugby.
Yep, yep. It truly is. And if people, like you just mentioned, having watched, the NFL football, American football over the past, you know, 3 decades, because I started watching football, like actually following football very young, like 12, 13 years old. So over the past 3 decades or so, uh, if people give rugby a chance, like football fans start watching rugby, it's just an amazing sport. And it's nonstop action. There's no timeouts. There's no, well, except every once in a while if there's an injury or something like that. But there's no timeouts. There's no going to commercial. It's nonstop action, and it's
Yeah.
just an amazing sport. But like we said, let's move on. Or this episode will turn into 3 hours. But we got to move on. But yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. So, as I had mentioned before, anybody could do the quick math and say, wait a minute, there's 12 teams, but there's only 10 here. So, where did the other two teams come from? So, the other two teams come from, and I just kept it here as simple as possible. So, one team comes from the South America and Pacific tournaments. And by the way, all these tournaments are going to happen in 2025 at different times. Currently, the Europe tournament to qualify for the Rugby World Cup took place and still taking place, I believe. Uh, it started in mid-January, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
So
over the
all the
last month
other
they've been playing. Yeah.
Yeah, so all the other regions are going to be competing to qualify for the Rugby World Cup at some point in 2025, obviously at different times. So one team is going to come from the South America Pacific. So these are the teams that finished in a certain position in their specific region. And I'll let everybody just read what I wrote here, just to keep it simple. And then there is something that's called a final qualification tournament. And as you can see, everybody see here, it's a pool of 4 teams playing in a robin format, and it's gonna be determined just like the Six Nations by points, competition points, not match points, but competition points. Uh, just like the Six Nations, it has competition points. So yeah, those are the other final two teams that are going to be picked to qualify for the 2027 Rugby World Cup. So the 10 plus these two teams make up the final 12 for the 24 team Rugby World Cup. Again, this is the first year that's going to be 24 teams. The previous World Cup was in 2023, only had 20 teams. So yeah, it's pretty cool, pretty exciting that the World Cup is expanding.
More rugby games to see.
Yes, the better. So yeah,
Exactly.
and I think, and I don't know if you know this rifle, and if you don't, it's okay. I think I read um, because this decision to expand it to 24 teams was made right after or just before, yeah, right after, if I'm not mistaken, the 2023 Rugby World Cup, or soon
I'm
after
not
it.
sure about that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I read that. Um, um, but I'm not sure if it was because of the success of the 2023 Rugby World Cup, or if that was something that was in the books already before the Rugby World Cup. So yeah, but nonetheless, it's been expanded by 4 teams. So that's, like you said, more games to watch.
Yeah, good for rugby.
Yes, yes, it is. So everybody, that's um, the different aspects of qualifying for the Rugby World Cup. Like I said before, we had mentioned it in the previous episode, but we wanted to just dig a little deeper into how teams qualify for the Rugby World Cup. On top of it expanding to 24 teams from 20. So very exciting stuff. And next thing you know, it'll be summer of 2027, because I believe it begins in August, if I'm not mistaken, or July.
Mm. Yeah, summer 27.
Yeah. So next thing you know, we'll be Rugby with Rifle will be covering the 2027 Rugby World Cup. I'm looking forward to that.
Hopefully, we'll be down under for that.
Hey, you never know. That could definitely be a goal.
Yeah.
Although I know that flight is, what is that, like a 18-hour flight or something like that?
Yeah, come on, man, suck it up.
Yes, I'm gonna have to suck it up and hopefully have enough money to fly business class so that we could get those lay down seats.
Oh, yes,
Because
definitely. That would be good.
I don't think I'll be able to make it 18 hours in
No,
an
that is
economy
difficult.
seat.
Cattle class is hard.
So yeah, that'll be exciting to go down under and actually watch the Rugby World Cup in person. Yeah, that's definitely will be something to strive for. So yeah, looking forward to that. So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Again, this weekend from the recording of this episode is going to be week 3 of the Six Nations series. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And before we end this episode, actually, Rifle, and this is on the American side of rugby. I think you had shared an article about Major League Rugby, which is essentially the professional league that's currently in America, um, having less they're trying to develop some type of rule to have less scrums. Did I hear that right?
Yes, that's correct.
I hope they don't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, just coming from before I started, uh, and this is just going off topic from the Rugby World Cup, but I found that interesting because before I started learning about the game of rugby, the only play that I knew was the scrum. Now, I didn't know it was called the scrum, but when I heard rugby, the only thing that came to my mind was the two teams pushing up against each other, and then somebody throw the ball in the middle, even though I didn't understand it. But I'm sure people who've heard of rugby but don't necessarily know the rules, the first thing that's going to pop in their head is the scrum.
Mm.
So I hope that rule doesn't go through, because taking the scrum or lessening the scrum in rugby is like taking, when the quarterback hikes the ball, when the center hikes the ball, it's like, oh, we're not gonna hike the ball anymore. The quarterback is just gonna stand there and throw the ball, call hike and throw the ball. That's my equivalent to. So I hope that doesn't go through.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Most definitely. Hope that doesn't go through.
Yeah. So Major League Rugby, if you hear this or you watch this episode, don't do it.
Yeah,
Please
we
don't
love
do
the
it.
scrum.
So that was a little sidebar. I digress. But again, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. Rifle, as always, thank you, sir.
No,
It was
very
a great
welcome. Thanks everyone
conversation.
for watching.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, great episode, and looking forward to Six Nations this weekend, week 3.
Cheers, everyone. Have a great weekend.
So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Take care, everybody. Thank you for watching this episode of Rugby with Rifle. Remember to press the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet to support this podcast.